Ricky Stanicky is a largely goofy film that leans into broad comedy for much of its first 2 acts. After years of using their made-up friend Ricky as a catch-all excuse for their various vacations, the trio of Dean, Zac Efron, JT, Andrew Cetino, and Wes, Jermaine Fowler, find themselves forced to prove Ricky's existence. To do this, they hire a desperate actor named Rod, John Cena, who, despite his own problems, is able to convincingly play Ricky. Unfortunately for the trio, Rod does too well and ends up further entrenched in their personal lives. A recipe for comic mishaps, Ricky Stanicky's characters end up with a surprisingly sweet ending, despite Rod's presence threatening their work and undermining the stability of their romantic relationships. This leads to a surprisingly emotionally driven and grounded third act, which retains a lot of comic elements but is more focused on the characters themselves. The ending of Ricky Stanicky is a surprisingly sweet one, and well worth unpacking on an emotional level. How the lie about Rod is exposed in Ricky Stanicky's ending. The truth about Ricky comes out at the worst time possible. Lex Scott Davis in Ricky Stanicky. After getting a job from Dean and JT's finance boss Summerhays, William H. Macy, Ricky actually ends up convincing their employer to adjust their business plan. Making matters worse, the inspirational story behind Ricky is given to Dean's reporter girlfriend Erin, Lex Scott Davis, as a press assignment. As the lies unravel, Dean accepts his fate and tries to come clean to her, only to discover that Erin has already figured it out. She breaks up with him, and the news story is scheduled to go live in front of his company. Dean steps up and exposes the truth himself, costing him his job with Summerhays. However, the news report ends up being far more inspirational than anyone would expect. In the report, Rod opens up about being at the end of his rope before encountering the trio. He paints Dean, JT, and Wes as kind men who helped someone who was struggling. He also makes the case that Summerhays is a great man with noble intentions, which wins over the initially wary business partners. Rod's interview ultimately smooths over the fallout of the lies. What happens to Dean, JT and Wes? Do they keep their jobs in Ricky Stanicky's ending? How the main trio escapes consequence once again. For much of the film, Dean and JT are convinced that they will lose their jobs because of Rod's lies, which makes sense given the scope that the falsehoods end up taking over the course of the film. This also threatens Wes' new job working alongside Ricky as an assistant. Initially, it appears that their lies will cost them their employment, as a furious Summerhays fires Dean right after he reveals the truth. It takes the potential business partners expressing admiration for Summerhays and Dean's charitable actions for Summerhays to relent and decide to keep Dean on. Wes may remain with the company, but his true passions shift after a conversation with Rod convinces him to take his artistic ambitions forward. The film's final moment reveals that Wes was able to create a successful holiday story that's specifically made for the LGBT community, which also helps impress his boyfriend enough to keep their relationship going. JT faces the most serious consequences, but even that isn't as bad as it could have been. JT's wife doesn't leave him and is implied to eventually forgive him, but she does force him to live in their backyard for months as recompense. Who the men following Rod were and what they really wanted. The greatest threat to Rod isn't actually all that dangerous. John Cena parody songs in Ricky Stanicky. One of the big reasons Rod decides to commit so heavily to the role of Ricky is to get out of Atlantic City. This is because there are 2 threatening men actively looking for him. Assuming they want payback for something he did that he has since forgotten about because he was inebriated, Rod is desperate to avoid them. The threat of the 2 men is part of what keeps Rod in the role of Ricky.